Hello everybody, and welcome to a Europa Universalis 5 markets tutorial. Markets are one of the most important things in EU5, with market access being up there with control in how important it is. But it's also something that's like not explained very well in the game, and so I thought I'd put together a little guide to talk about markets, supply and demand, where to put your markets, and like how many markets to have, and how to use them to get rich. All right, so fundamentally, you can think of a market as basically a bucket of demand. Every province will produce demand. The pops in the province will produce demand, as well as the buildings will produce demand. The demand will get sent to effectively the market capital, or market center, I should say. And then all of your provinces will attempt to fulfill the demand to make you money, depending on how close they are to the market capital. This is where we get into one of the most important things in the game, which is market access, which is how close to the market capital your province is and how efficiently it can buy and sell goods from the market center. So market access is different for RGOs and for buildings. For RGOs, it's a straight percentage modifier on the amount of money you're going to get from the RGO itself. So here, it's your capital, so you get 100% control, which makes things easier. So this RGO will sell wine to the market times 100% because you have 100% control, multiplied by 85% because of the market access. So you'll get 85% of the money from wine getting sold. This creates a bit of an interesting situation where you can actually hurt yourself by building RGOs. So if I go over here and build wine over here, you're going to have 15, 20% control. It's going to drop to 15 or 16. Of that, multiply that by almost 50%, 55%. You're only going to end up with like 8% of the money that this RGO is producing from selling wine on the market. And since they're in the same market, building this RGO will drop the price of wine because all of the wine will still make it to the market. You just won't get very much money from that transaction. And then that will drop the price that this RGO is using. And so you can actually lose money because you get very little money from this RGO and you get a lot of more money from this RGO. And so building all of your RGOs is typically not necessarily a great thing. I see a lot of people like maxing out all their RGOs in their country and stuff, and usually building RGOs is good, but due to the market access and to control differences, you can actually hurt your economy by building RGOs. On the flip side, regular buildings, I guess I should say, don't interact with market access the same way. So if we click into this Carpenter's Guild, normally a Carpenter Guild will produce or use one lumber and then some other stuff and produce one furniture. Because of the 85% market access, this Carpenter's Guild will only produce 0.85 furniture and use 0.85 lumber. So you don't run into this situation like you do with RGOs, where you can screw yourself over by building in provinces with bad market access, because it is a throughput modifier, not a percentage modifier after the good is sold. But just due to the way control mechanics work, it still makes sense to pack your burger buildings and other buildings you build in your towns into regions with high control, and therefore probably high market access. There are a couple of ways to increase market access to make these things more efficient. One is trade buildings. So each level of marketplace will give you half a percent of market access. A market village down here will also give you 0.5% of market access. These aren't huge modifiers. They're not going to go crazy. Like this entire city has a max of 10. So the most you could get, at least at this point in the game, from your marketplaces in the city is 5 market access, which is good, but it's not going to materially significantly change the market access situation. Also, roads will decrease the market access cost to go across your land. So it will turn, let's see here, this 5%, 5.4% to like 4.9% market access loss to travel into this province, which again is fine on the margins. Like, it's not bad. And, you know, as you build your road network, this will kind of compound. But like fundamentally, you're not going to be able to significantly change, at least in the early game, the amount of market access you have. And this is why one of my big pieces of advice for people who are trying to figure out the economics of EU5 is to put your market capital or market center on top of your capital or on top of your regional capitals, because you want a region with super high control and super high market access, because they interact with each other. And it's really important to build in places where you have high market access and high control. And so as Castile, starting the game with your capital here and then your market center over here just creates a very inefficient situation, and it slows down your economic growth as Castile until you move your market or your capital. In this case, I would move the market to your capital. I mean, long term, you're probably moving your capital down here and putting a regional capital up here, but still, like, I like to have one market per regional capital / capital that I have in my country. And I find that works out pretty well. The other half of markets, and this is equally important and even less well known, I feel like, is demand. What's going to happen is you're going to build a bunch of these buildings, and, you know, you can sort them by profitability and be like, oh, Carpenter's Guild, like 0.43, that's a really good building. 0.18, that's a little bit worse, but still worth building. 0.15, all right, still worth building. And then you get down into buildings where it's like, these buildings are not making you any money, and you run out of profitable things to invest into. Once you run out of profitable things to invest into and like really good RGOs to upgrade, you need to switch to boosting demand. And boosting demand in your markets is done in a couple of ways. The most simple way is just urbanization. Each city or each town is going to give you more nobles, more burghers, and more of other population, but really nobles and burghers are the people who demand the most. And that's going to boost demand and then boost the profitability of all of your buildings in your market. And then city, as a layer on top of that, gives you even more nobles and burghers to increase your demand even more once you get to mid to late game when you can afford to build a bunch of cities. And then the other way you can boost demand is through buildings. So something like this temple will, well, currently it's lacking some goods, but like it will demand goods that you have to pay for across your market, and that will increase the profitability of your buildings that you have built. Now, the interesting thing about demand, and this is one of the most important concepts in EU5, is that the way the game works is that you have the sergeantry here, right? It's going to buy these goods off the market for whatever the market rate is. And on top of that, you are only going to pay 20% of that price. So for every ducat you spend in building maintenance, you're actually putting 5 ducats into your market in the form of demand. And so if you have high enough tax rates, if you have high enough control, and if you're efficiently providing supply for that demand, you can actually create a bit of an economic flywheel where you pay a ducat in building maintenance that increases the demand by 5 ducats across your country. And then you turn around and then you fulfill that demand by building, you know, the building that produces leather and the building that produces weaponry and all that sort of stuff. And you make money off of that, which then allows you to turn around and produce more buildings that increase demand more, and rinse and repeat. This entire thing is also going to spike the amount of burghers, typically, or clergy, or other population that you have in your market, which is going to further increase demand. And so the whole thing will spin around circles until basically, if you're doing it right, 200, maybe 250 years into the game, EU5 economics basically break down. I mean, you break the game and you have infinite money, and at that point, I mean, you can do whatever you want. Probably quit because the game stops being fun when you have infinite money, in my opinion. But yeah, and so learning that economic loop is very important for economic growth. And there's like a couple of different loops. You can build like a bunch of armories and then build like the tanneries and the weaponsmiths that like go into that. You can build books with like libraries and universities giving book demand, and then scriptoriums building books. And then there's the whole like iron into tools sort of like economic flywheel that everyone talks about. That's also a good one to go into. You're probably going to end up with multiple of these things depending on what you need at any point in time. Trade, which I feel like is a very often talked about form of markets, kind of bad in this version of the game, is going to allow you to hopefully increase the demand of your market without like beyond what your population can sustain by exporting goods to other markets. It can be good in certain situations where you like have a bunch of, I don't know, fine cloth and you can like dump it on another market, you make a bunch of money. Problem is the AI and like other players, if you're playing multiplayer, will build the buildings that are profitable in their market. And so if, you know, Bordeaux has like really expensive fine cloth and you're building fine cloth and you're exporting it to Bordeaux, well, the AI is going to sit there and be like, oh, fine cloth is really expensive in my market. I'm going to build buildings that produce fine cloth to make me money. And then over time, your profitability of your trade route will get poorer and poorer and poorer until like you're no longer like actually getting any money from your trade. The one exception to that is certain like limited RGOs. So for example, like all the iron in Iberia is in the north. And so the south, any southern market's just going to have to import iron. And so you can start like a trade route where you like build a bunch of iron, you export it, and you make a bunch of money off that. And it can like long term make you a lot of money. Same with colonies, because there's RGOs in the colonies that you just don't have in Europe, at least until the Columbian Exchange. And so you can make a significant amount of money that way. The only other issue is currently the meta in the game is to like give your give your states a lot of power to make them happy so you can maximize tax rates, because tax is just better than trade, at least currently. And so you tend to have not very high crown power, and so you don't tend to make a lot of money off of trade anyways. However, the marketplaces themselves, in a weird way, despite not making you a bunch of money, are still great because of the market access they provide, because they are one of those beautiful buildings that boost demand, right? And they also produce burgers. So it's still worth building a lot of marketplaces. They also allow for like internal trade, but trade itself is not a huge moneymaker, at least for most countries in EU5, unless you have like a specific, like, I don't know, Venice type setup. The final thing to talk about in terms of markets is food. So each market is also effectively a food bank where food goes in and food comes out. You can end up in some rough situation if you don't have enough food in your market. So even if, you know, you have some RGOs like this one over here, you're not going to make a lot of money off this. Bad market access, terrible control. It still might be worth maxing out this wheat because you need this market to not go like too negative. Like markets can go a little negative in the winter if can be fine like that, but like you don't want to significantly stress your markets because a war will happen, you'll raise a bunch of levies, suddenly your food production will go down and like you'll have a big old issue. And like honestly, food is like the thing that stops you from like mass urbanizing too much. Mass urbanizing is very good because it boosts a lot of demand and it gives you the opportunity to build buildings that also boost demand, but you got to be careful that you don't run out of food in any of your markets. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'm missing on markets. That's pretty much it. I keep my trade mostly automated. I think the AI does a fine enough job of doing trade. Just to recap, I really like my markets. I like to have a market for every capital that I have, or regional capital, assuming that I have regional capitals spaced out far enough to like warrant multiple markets. If your market's too small, it doesn't have like a lot of demand, and then it's hard to like build up every single supply building you need to feed it, and you don't have the RGOs you need. It kind of helps to have like a bigger market, just so that it has all the goods that it needs. And then if your market's too big, then you get into like terrible market access, which at that point, like you just struggle to get a lot of value out of your RGOs. So yeah, with that, I think that is everything. Let me know if you guys have any questions or if you have any other market access tips, and yeah, catch you later.